never used to believe in ghosts, or glitches in reality, or anything outside the realm of logical explanation. But now I'm not so sure. My name is Jacob, and I work in a corporate office in downtown Boston. It's a pretty standard high-rise, gray walls, flickering fluorescent lights, the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the break room. I've worked there for 5 years, and in all that time, nothing remotely unusual has happened. Until last night. I had stayed late, finishing up reports for a client, and by the time I was ready to leave, the office was nearly empty. The only sounds were the occasional hum of a printer and the distant murmur of a janitor's radio down the hall. I pressed the button for the elevator, watching the numbers above the doors count down. 10, 9. A normal, uneventful evening. Then, as the doors slid open, something strange happened. The 19th floor button lit up on its own. I frowned. There was no 19th floor in this building. I knew that for a fact. The highest floor was the 18th, and the space above that was nothing but maintenance access and air ducts. I reached out, pressing the button for the 12th floor, where I had parked my car. Nothing happened. The elevator didn't respond. Instead, the doors closed with a heavy thunk, and I felt the familiar weightless sensation as it began to ascend. I pressed the emergency stop, but the button didn't work. The panel didn't light up. The elevator just kept moving, higher than it should. When it finally stopped, the doors slid open with a soft chime, and I hesitated before stepping out. The hallway beyond was silent. Dust covered the floor in thick layers, undisturbed for years. The overhead lights were dim, flickering slightly. An abandoned office stretched before me, its cubicles coated in grime, as if frozen in time. A single whiteboard hung on the far wall. At first glance, it seemed like an old employee roster, filled with faded photographs and names beneath each one. My stomach twisted as I stepped closer, brushing away the dust with my sleeve. There, among the faded faces, was my own. But underneath my photo was a different name. Robert Wells, missing since 1997. A chill ran down my spine. My name wasn't Robert Wells, and in 1997 I was just a kid. I took a shaky step back, my breathing shallow. The air felt wrong, heavy, oppressive, like something unseen was watching me. Then, from the corner of my eye I saw movement. A shadow shifted in the glass reflection of an old conference room. Not my own. Something else. Something taller. I turned, nothing was there. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. My breath came out in a visible mist, curling in the stale air. I didn't wait any longer. I bolted back into the elevator, slamming the closed door button repeatedly. The elevator groaned, the lights flickering wildly. Then, with a shudder, it began to move. Down. I held my breath as the numbers ticked lower. 18, 17, 16. When the doors finally opened again, I stumbled out, my heart hammering. I was in the parking garage. Everything looked normal. The concrete floor, the familiar cars, the dull hum of the security cameras. For a moment, I thought maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe I had just been exhausted, working too late, hallucinating from lack of sleep. But now, every time I look in the mirror, something feels off. My reflection is me, but not quite. Sometimes the angle is wrong. Sometimes the eyes looking back at me don't seem like my own. And sometimes, just for a split second, I think it smiles before I do. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the moment I saw my own face under that stranger's name. Robert Wells, missing since 1997. It had to be some kind of mistake, prank maybe, or some weird coincidence. And yet, every time I closed my eyes, I saw the empty office, frozen in time. I saw the thick dust, the flickering lights, the shadow moving in the glass. Worst of all, I saw my reflection in the mirror across the room. I wasn't imagining it. Something was off. I barely recognized my own face. By morning, I had convinced myself that I needed to go back. I had to see it again. I arrived at the office early, before most employees showed up. The building looked normal, people chatting by the coffee machine, the hum of computers starting up, the same ordinary routine. But I knew better. I stood in front of the elevator, hesitating before pressing the button. The memory of the doors opening on their own made my fingers tremble. With a soft chime, the elevator arrived. This time I was ready. I stepped inside and stared at the panel. No 19th floor, just as I expected. I exhaled and pressed 12. The doors slid shut. The elevator moved normally this time, smooth and steady. I almost laughed at myself. Maybe I had really imagined the whole thing. Then, the lights flickered. The elevator jerked, hard, knocking me against the railing. The panel dimmed, then glowed faintly as a new button appeared. 19. I stared at it, my pulse pounding. The elevator began rising, slowly, steadily. The numbers on the display ticked up. 14, 15, 16. I reached out, pressing every button I could. Stop, open doors, emergency. But nothing worked. The air inside grew stifling, the walls seeming to close in. The numbers kept climbing. 19. The doors slid open. The office was exactly as I had left it. Dust-covered desks, abandoned chairs, the lingering scent of old paper. The air felt heavy, thick with something unseen. I stepped forward, heart hammering. The whiteboard was still there, its photos faded and curled at the edges. But this time something was different. My photo had changed. The name beneath it no longer read Robert Wells. It read Jacob Carter, missing since 2024. My stomach twisted. That was my name, my year. I stumbled back, knocking over an old chair. The crash echoed through the empty room. Then I heard it. A whisper. Low, distorted, coming from the darkened hallway. I spun around, heart pounding. Nothing. But then I saw movement in the reflection of a cracked computer monitor. Someone was standing just behind me, tall, still, watching. I turned. Nothing. But the whispering continued, growing louder, overlapping voices speaking words I couldn't understand. The air was ice cold now, my breath coming out in panicked clouds. I needed to leave. Now. I ran back toward the elevator, slamming my fist against the button. The doors wouldn't close. Then, just as suddenly as before, the whispering stopped. And the voice spoke. You don't belong here. The doors slammed shut, and the elevator plummeted. When the doors opened, I fell out, gasping, landing on cold concrete. The parking garage. I was back. But something was wrong. The cars were different. The lighting was dimmer. The air smelled of something rotting. I staggered to my feet and ran for the exit. I had to get out of this place. But when I reached the doors to the lobby, I froze. The walls were different. The colors, the furniture, it all looked older. Then I saw the newspaper stand. I stepped forward, my breath catching in my throat as I read the date on the front page. April 7th, 1997. I wasn't in my time anymore. I had gone back to his, to Robert Wells' time. And somewhere, trapped in that impossible office on the 19th floor, he was wearing my face. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. April 7th, 1997. That couldn't be right. It was 2024 when I stepped into that elevator. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to think rationally. Maybe this was an elaborate prank. Maybe I was hallucinating from stress and exhaustion. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't where I was supposed to be. And if I didn't get back soon, I might never leave. I rushed toward the exit doors, pushing them open, stepping out onto the street. The city looked different. The cars, the billboards, the storefronts, everything was older, faded, out of place. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone. No signal, no Wi-Fi, just a black screen, as if the device had never existed. Panic began to claw at my chest. I needed help. I needed to find someone, anyone, who could tell me what the hell was going on. Then I saw him, a man standing at the corner, dressed in an old brown suit, watching me. He looked wrong, like his face was slightly out of focus, his features shifting whenever I tried to focus on them. I turned away, heart racing, and hurried down the sidewalk. I needed to get back inside. I needed to find the elevator again. The lobby was eerily silent when I re-entered the building. The receptionist's desk was empty, the phones unmanned. The elevator doors stood closed, their silver surface reflecting my pale, panicked face. I pressed the button. Nothing. I pressed it again, harder this time. Still nothing. Then, somewhere behind me, I heard footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the reflection in the polished elevator doors. The man in the brown suit was standing right behind me. But his reflection wasn't right. It was smiling. Even though I knew that he wasn't smiling in real life. I squeezed my eyes shut, my pulse hammering. This isn't real. Wake up. A sharp whisper brushed against my ear. He doesn't want you to leave. I spun around. The man was gone. The ding of the elevator made me jump. The doors opened. I didn't hesitate. I leapt inside, slamming the closed door button. My breathing shallow, sweat running down my back. The elevator didn't move. For several seconds, I stood there, trapped in that silent metal box. Then the panel flickered. One by one, the buttons dimmed. 12, 11, 10, until only one remained lit. 19. I shook my head. No, I am not going back there. I pressed every button. Nothing responded. I hit the emergency call button. Silence. Then, over the elevator speakers, came a distorted voice. A voice that sounded like mine. You took too long. The elevator lurched upward. The ride was slow, excruciating. I could hear something shifting beyond the walls, like movement in the elevator shaft. Then, a low knock. From outside the elevator, I pressed myself against the back wall, heart hammering. Another knock, this time closer. Then I saw it. A handprint, pressed against the metal doors. Not a normal handprint, a reversed one, like something was on the other side, pressing through the metal. The doors shuddered, warping slightly as if something was trying to push its way inside. I slammed the buttons, praying for the elevator to move faster. I didn't want to be here when the doors opened. Then, a final knock, right next to my ear, and a voice whispered, low and distorted. He took your place. The lights went out. The elevator stopped. The doors slid open. I expected the abandoned office. I expected dust, flickering lights, the empty silence. But this time I stepped out into something else. A mirror. An endless room of mirrors, stretching in every direction. I turned, trying to find the elevator again, but it was gone. My reflection stood in every glass surface, staring back at me. Only, not all of them moved when I did. Some were just standing there, watching. One of them tilted its head and smiled. Not a normal smile. A wide, stretched grin. Too many teeth. Too much shadow where the eyes should be. I stepped forward, and the others began to follow. I ran. Through the mirrors, past reflections that weren't my own, past shifting shapes that mimicked me but weren't really me. The whispers grew louder, overlapping voices, words I couldn't understand. I didn't stop, couldn't. Then, ahead of me I saw it, an elevator. Different, older, the same kind I had seen in photos from the 1990s. I didn't care. I lunged for it, slamming the button. The doors opened, and inside was me, the man in the brown suit. Only now I could see his face clearly. It was my face. Older. Wrong. He smiled, and as he reached out, everything went black. I woke up gasping. The cold, hard sensation of the elevator floor pressed against my back. My vision swam as I sat up, disoriented, my head pounding like I had been hit with a hammer. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then the memories came flooding back. The mirrors, the reflections that weren't really me. Him, the man in the brown suit with my face. I forced myself to my feet, gripping the handrail for support. The elevator was moving. Slowly, steadily, the numbers ticking downward. 18, 17, 16. Was I going back? The thought sent a cold shiver through my body. Then I noticed something that made my breath catch in my throat. The walls of the elevator weren't metal anymore. They were mirrors. I saw myself on every side, reflecting endlessly into the distance. But not all of them moved. Some just stood there, watching. One of them tilted its head and smiled. The elevator shuddered violently, knocking me against the railing. The reflections moved, not in sync with me, but on their own. One took a step forward, then another. I stumbled back, my pulse hammering. The doors dinged and slid open. I nearly collapsed as I stumbled out. I was back in the parking garage. The dull hum of the fluorescent lights, the faint smell of oil and concrete. It was all normal again. I spun around. The elevator doors stood open, revealing only the ordinary metal walls inside. No mirrors, no reflections. I exhaled shakily. I was back. I didn't wait to question it. I ran to my car, fumbling with my keys. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unlock the door. Sliding into the driver's seat, I started the engine, gripping the wheel as I tried to steady my breathing. I glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. My reflection wasn't moving. My stomach dropped. I turned my head slowly, looking into the mirror. The me staring back had an expression I didn't recognize. His lips twitched, curling into a slow, unnatural grin. My breath caught in my throat. Then he spoke. But his lips didn't move. The words echoed inside my skull like a thought that wasn't my own. You shouldn't have come back. My vision blurred, my mind spiraling as the world around me tilted. Everything ripped apart. I woke up in my bed. Sunlight streamed through the window, birds chirping outside. I sat up, heart hammering, sweat clinging to my skin. Had it all been a dream? I barely had time to process it before my phone buzzed. A text from my boss. Jacob, where are you? You didn't come in today. I frowned, typing a quick reply. What? I was there yesterday. I stayed late. 3 dots appeared. Then his response came through. Jacob, you haven't been to the office in 3 days. I stared at the screen. 3 days? That wasn't possible. I had just left the office last night. Hadn't I? I rushed to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. I needed to clear my head. I gripped the sink, breathing hard, staring at my reflection in the mirror. And that's when I saw it. A small difference. Something so subtle, so barely noticeable, that I almost missed it. My reflection's eyes weren't the same shade as mine. They were just a little darker, like they belonged to someone else. I don't go near elevators anymore. I take the stairs. I walk. I drive. I do whatever it takes to stay out of those metal boxes. But sometimes, when I catch my reflection in passing, I think I see him, the other me, waiting, watching, smiling, because he knows one day the elevator will call me back. And next time, I won't escape. I've always been afraid of elevators. Not because of claustrophobia, not because of heights, but because, deep down, I've always had this irrational fear that one day, I'd step inside and never get out. I never thought that fear would become real. My name is Ethan, and I live in a high-rise apartment in downtown Chicago. The building is old, but it has modern renovations, polished tile floors, bright LED lighting, security cameras in every hallway. Feels safe. Or at least it used to. Last Friday night, I got into the elevator like I always did. And that's when the nightmare started. I had just finished a late shift at work, exhausted and barely paying attention as I stepped into the elevator. I hit the button for the 18th floor. The doors closed. The elevator began to rise. Then ding. The doors slid open again. I frowned. I was still on the first floor. The lobby was exactly the same as before. The same dull glow of the ceiling lights. The same empty hallway leading to the entrance doors. For a moment, I thought maybe I hadn't pressed the button hard enough. So I did it again. The doors closed. The elevator moved. Then ding. The doors slid open. I was still on the first floor. The hallway looked different now. The lights flickered slightly, casting strange shadows across the walls. The security desk, which was usually occupied by the night concierge, was empty. The door to his office was ajar. Something was wrong. I hesitated, staring at the open door. A strange unease crept up my spine. Then I heard it, a shuffle from inside the office. I leaned forward slightly, peering through the doorway. There was a folder sitting on the desk, left open. My name was on the cover. My stomach twisted. Why the hell would there be a file on me? I stepped out of the elevator, moving cautiously toward the desk. The folder was filled with photos. Of me. Photos taken from different angles, different times of the day. Some were from my apartment hallway. Others from inside my own living room. I flipped through them, my hands trembling. Then I found the one that made my blood run cold. It was a photo of me standing inside the elevator. Right now. Wearing the exact same clothes. Holding this exact folder. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. My eyes darted toward the security cameras mounted in the corners of the ceiling. Were they even recording? Then, a voice crackled over the elevator speaker behind me. Low, distorted, like it was being played through an old radio. You shouldn't have come out. A cold wave of fear washed over me. I turned back toward the elevator. The doors were still open, but now the interior looked different. The walls weren't smooth metal anymore. They were covered in scratches. Deep, jagged marks running from the floor to the ceiling, like something had been clawing at them. And in the center of the back wall, someone had carved words into the metal. Don't let it close. Then, the elevator dinged. The doors started closing. I lunged forward, slamming my hand against the metal. Too late. The doors shut in my face. I was trapped outside. The hallway lights flickered again, buzzing loudly. I turned, heart pounding, scanning my surroundings. Everything felt off. The air was too still. The walls seemed longer, stretching in ways they shouldn't. Then, down at the far end of the hall, I saw a shadow move. A tall, hunched figure, standing perfectly still. Watching me, I took a step back. The elevator behind me dinged again. I spun around. The doors slid open. But the inside was different now. It wasn't the scratched-up metal box anymore. It was dark, like a tunnel stretching endlessly downward. Cold air spilled out, carrying the scent of something rotting. A deep, guttural voice whispered from within. Get in. I turned back toward the hallway. The figure was closer now. I had no choice. I stepped into the elevator, and the doors slammed shut. The elevator dropped. Faster than any elevator should be able to move. The walls stretched, distorting, the overhead lights flickering wildly. I pressed every button I could, nothing worked. I gripped the railing, my ears popping from the pressure. And then, it stopped. Suddenly, violently, the force knocked me to my knees. The lights flickered once. Then ding. The doors opened, and I was back on the first floor, exactly where I had started. But this time the hallway was pitch black. And someone was waiting for me. The hallway beyond the elevator was pitch black. Not the kind of darkness where your eyes eventually adjust. This was something deeper, something unnatural. An absence of light so complete that it felt alive. Something was in there, watching, waiting. I could feel it. The elevator behind me dinged again. The doors started closing. Panic surged through me. I threw myself forward, lunging out into the darkness just as the doors slammed shut behind me. For a moment I was blind. Then, slowly, the hallway lights flickered on, dim, weak, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. I turned in a slow circle, heart hammering. The lobby looked the same, but something about it was wrong. The walls seemed stretched, the doors and furniture slightly off, like a poorly rendered copy of reality. And then I saw it. The security desk was occupied again. A man sat behind it, his head lowered, his hands folded neatly on the surface. But he wasn't moving. Hey! I called out, my voice hoarse. I need help. No response. I took a slow step forward. The air felt thick, heavy in my lungs. Something in my gut screamed at me to run. But I had to get out of here. I reached the desk and hesitated. His head was still bowed, as if he had fallen asleep sitting up. Cleared my throat. Sir. Nothing. I reached out, tapping his shoulder. The second my fingers made contact, his head snapped up. His eyes were sewn shut. Blood crusted the threads. His mouth stretched open, jaw unhinging far too wide. And then, in a wet, choking voice he spoke. "You shouldn't have left the elevator." I stumbled back, heart pounding. The lights above flickered violently, buzzing louder. Then the elevator dinged behind me. The doors slid open. I turned, and my stomach dropped. It wasn't the same elevator anymore. The walls inside were covered in handprints, bloody ones. A low hum filled the air, coming from deep inside the elevator. It was calling me back. The security guard's lips twitched, forming an eerie, twisted smile. I took a step backward. No, I wasn't going back in there. Then I heard footsteps. From behind me, slow, dragging, something heavy moving across the tile floor. I didn't want to turn around, but I had to. At the far end of the hallway, something was crawling out of the darkness. First, it looked like a man. But then, it started pulling itself forward. Arms too long, fingers bent at impossible angles. Its face blurred, shifting like a distorted photograph. It twitched violently, its movements unnatural. And then, as if noticing me for the first time, it screamed. A high, shrill, inhuman sound. It charged. I ran. Straight for the elevator. The bloody handprints seemed to shift, stretching, reaching for me as I leapt inside. The doors slammed shut just as the thing reached them. A horrible thud echoed through the metal. Then, silence. I collapsed against the back wall, gasping for breath. My pulse hammered in my ears. My lungs burned. The lights in the elevator flickered. And then, the buttons on the panel began to disappear, one by one, until only one remained. One. The first floor, where I had started. The moment I saw it, the elevator began to move. Up, down? I couldn't even tell anymore. All I knew was that I wasn't getting out. Not yet. Not ever. The ride wasn't over. The elevator moved in complete silence. No hum of the motor. No shift in weight. Just an eerie, unnatural stillness as the single remaining button 1 glowed faintly on the panel. I held my breath, my back pressed against the mirrored wall, watching the reflection of my own wide, terrified eyes. Something felt wrong, like I wasn't alone, like something was watching me. The lights overhead flickered, and in that brief moment of darkness, I saw it. A shape in the reflection. Tall. Wrong. Standing directly behind me. I spun around, nothing was there. But when I looked back at the mirror, it was closer. A shadowy figure, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its arms stretched too long, fingers twitching. It didn't move like a person. It moved like something pretending to be a person. Something that had been watching me from the beginning. The lights flickered again. The reflection lurched forward. I smashed my fist against the buttons, desperately trying to make the elevator stop. Nothing responded. The mirror warped slightly, like something was pressing against it from the other side. The shape opened its mouth. But instead of words, there was a horrible static sound, like a radio caught between frequencies. The elevator suddenly jerked downward, sending me sprawling onto the floor. The lights went out completely, and in the darkness I heard it. A whisper. "You can't leave." I don't know how long I was in the dark. Seconds? Minutes? Hours? The only thing I could hear was my own shallow breathing. And then, the elevator dinged. The doors slid open. I blinked, disoriented by the sudden light. I was back in the lobby. But not the lobby I knew. This one was rotting. The walls were cracked, stained with something dark. The floor was warped, the ceiling lights hanging by exposed wires, flickering weakly. Everything smelled wrong. A mix of mildew, rust, and something rotting. I staggered to my feet, gripping the doorframe. I was back on the first floor. Again. The loop wasn't over. I wasn't out. I turned my head slowly, scanning the room. And then I saw them. The others. Figures standing in the shadows, lining the edges of the room. All watching me. All completely still. Their faces blurred. Their bodies unnaturally thin, like stretched out shadows. and then, as one, they stepped forward. I turned and slammed my fist against the elevator button. Nothing. The figures moved closer. Their footsteps made no sound. One of them reached out. Its fingers were too long, too many joints bending in the wrong directions. The elevator dinged behind me. The doors slid open, and standing inside was me. My stomach dropped. The person in the elevator looked exactly like me. Same clothes, same face, but his eyes were wrong. Too dark, too hollow. He smiled, and then, in my own voice, he spoke. "Your turn." The figures behind me were almost touching me now. I had no choice. I stepped inside. The other me stepped out. The doors slid shut, and the elevator began to rise. The buttons on the panel faded away. All except one. Infinity. The elevator wasn't stopping. Not ever. The ride would never end. And outside, in my world, the other me had taken my place. Smiling. Living my life. And no one would ever know. I never believed in the supernatural. Ghost stories, urban legends, all that stuff. I thought it was just nonsense people told to scare each other. But now I know better. My name is Chris, and 2 weeks ago, I stepped into an elevator for what should have been a normal night at work. Instead, I left reality behind. And I don't think I ever really came back. I work as a night courier, delivering confidential packages for a private company. It's mostly boring work. Picking up sealed envelopes, signing paperwork, riding elevators in high-rise buildings, then dropping them off at various locations. That night, my last stop was at an old corporate office downtown. A 32-story building with a marble lobby and a receptionist who looked half asleep when I arrived. "Delivery for Suite 1402, I told her, placing the envelope on the counter. She barely glanced up. "Take it up yourself," she muttered. "Elevators on the right." I sighed but didn't argue. I stepped into the far-right elevator, pressed the button for the 14th floor, and leaned against the wall as the doors slid shut. The hum of the motor kicked in. The elevator started moving. Then, without warning, it changed direction. I felt it instantly, a shift downward. The elevator was going down. I frowned and pressed the button for the 14th floor again. Nothing happened. I tried pressing open doors. Still nothing. A dull, mechanical clunk echoed through the shaft, and the air inside the elevator seemed to tighten, growing thick, suffocating. I checked the panel again. The buttons for all the floors were gone. All except one. Basement. But there was no basement in this building. I was sure of it. The elevator slowed, the metal groaning as it came to a stop. The doors slid open, and I saw something impossible. The space beyond wasn't a basement. It was a long, yellow-lit hallway, stretching endlessly in both directions. The walls were covered in faded, peeling wallpaper, a sickly shade of yellow. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered, buzzing softly. The air smelled stale, like old carpet and something faintly sour. It was completely silent. I stepped forward cautiously, looking left, then right. Both directions stretched into the distance, turning into a hazy blur the farther I looked. Something about this place felt wrong, like it wasn't supposed to exist. The elevator dinged behind me. I turned just in time to see the doors closing. I ran for it. Too late. The doors slammed shut. The elevator was gone. A heavy, suffocating silence settled around me. I was alone. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking. No signal. No Wi-Fi. The time display on my screen was frozen at 12:04 a.m. My breathing grew shallow. I had to find another way out. I turned back toward the hallway. And then, footsteps. From somewhere deep within the corridor. Fast. Uneven. Getting closer. I didn't wait. I ran. The hallway twisted and turned in impossible ways, splitting into intersections that hadn't been there before. The walls seemed to pulse, like the building was alive. And no matter which direction I ran, the footsteps never stopped. They weren't behind me. They were ahead, beside, all around. Something was moving, staying just out of sight. I turned a corner and froze. At the far end of the hallway, standing perfectly still, was a man. But something was wrong with his face. It was blurry, shifting like a corrupted photograph. And even from this distance I could tell. He was watching me. My breath caught in my throat. I took a slow step backward. The man didn't move. I turned, looking for another hallway, another door, anything to get away. Then I heard it. A whisper. Low, distorted, echoing through the walls. "You're not supposed to be here." I spun back around. The man was closer. I hadn't seen him move. I hadn't heard him take a step. But now he was only a few feet away. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. "What is this place?" I whispered. His mouth twitched, not into a smile, into a jagged, wrong shape. Then he took a single step forward, and the lights went out. The lights went out. The hallway was swallowed in total darkness. I held my breath, straining to hear anything. A whisper, a movement, even my own footsteps. But there was nothing. Just silence. Thick, suffocating. Then, a breath, not mine, came from right next to my ear. I bolted. I ran blindly, my hands outstretched, crashing into walls, turning corners I couldn't see. My heart pounded in my chest, every nerve in my body screaming to wake up, wake up, wake up. Then, the lights flickered back on, and I froze. I wasn't in the same hallway anymore. The walls were taller, stretching impossibly high, curving inward. The floor beneath me was softer, like damp carpet, and the air smelled different, like something had been rotting here for a long, long time. I turned slowly, my breath coming in sharp gasps, and that's when I saw them. Scattered along the walls, half buried in the peeling yellow wallpaper, were faces. Human faces, their mouths stretched open in silent screams, their eyes wide and lifeless. Some were fresh, their skin pale and waxy. Others were nothing but skulls, their flesh long since decayed. And in the center of it all, standing perfectly still, was him. The man with the blurry face. I staggered backward. His head twitched slightly, as if he was trying to focus on me. Then he whispered, his voice a garbled mess of static and broken syllables. "You're staying." I didn't think. I ran. The hallways shifted as I moved, twisting in ways that shouldn't be possible. I turned a corner, only to find myself facing the same hallway I had just left. The walls pulsed, the faces buried inside them shifting slightly, as if they were watching me. Then, somewhere behind me, footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. I didn't turn around. I kept moving, my lungs burning, my legs screaming for rest. Then, up ahead, a door. A rusted metal door, slightly ajar. I didn't care where it led. I threw myself inside and slammed it shut behind me. The silence that followed was heavy. My pulse thundered in my ears. I was in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, some rusted shut, others hanging open with papers spilling onto the floor. An old wooden desk sat in the center, covered in dust. And on it there was a folder, a familiar folder, one with my name on it. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling as I reached for it. Inside were documents, typewritten notes on yellowed paper, my birth certificate, my employment records, then a missing persons report. I frowned, my eyes scanning the text. Name Christopher Owens. Age 27. Date reported missing. April 12, 2024. That was today. I flipped to the last page. There was a single line, handwritten in red ink. "Do not let him out." My breath caught in my throat. The air in the room suddenly shifted. A pressure change, like something had just entered the space with me. I turned slowly. The blurry-faced man was standing in the corner, closer than ever before. And this time, I could see his face starting to clear. He looked like me. I didn't scream. Couldn't. I just stared as his features twisted, morphing into an imperfect copy of my own. His jaw stretched wider, his skin too pale, his eyes too dark. And then, in a voice that matched mine exactly, he whispered, "It's your turn." The lights flickered, and in the moment of darkness, he lunged. I threw myself backward, knocking over the desk as the thing that looked like me lunged forward. My body slammed against the filing cabinets, pain jolting through my ribs. Papers scattered across the floor, fluttering in the stale air. The lights flickered again, and in those brief moments of darkness, I heard it whispering. My own voice, distorted, warped. "You can't leave." Then silence. I held my breath. The lights flickered back on. The room was empty. I didn't wait. I ran. Bursting out of the office, I tore through the endless hallways, past the shifting walls, past the faces trapped in the wallpaper. I didn't look at them. I didn't listen to their muffled screams. I just ran. And then, I saw it. Up ahead, at the end of the corridor, an elevator. The doors stood slightly ajar, the inside flickering with pale white light. I sprinted toward it, lungs burning, my vision swimming. Then, behind me, footsteps, fast, closing in. I lunged into the elevator, slamming my hand against the closed door button. The doors shuddered, then stopped. I turned. The blurry-faced thing was standing just outside the elevator, staring at me. It didn't move, didn't try to force its way in. It just smiled. And in my own voice, it whispered, "Next time you stay." The doors slammed shut, and the elevator began to rise. The numbers on the panel flickered. They weren't normal numbers anymore. They were symbols shifting and twisting, unreadable. The air inside the elevator felt thicker, charged with an unnatural energy. I gripped the railing, my pulse hammering. Then, ding, the doors slid open. I stumbled out, and my heart nearly stopped. I was back. The real first floor. The lobby was normal again. The receptionist sat at her desk, scrolling through her phone, completely unaware that I had just been somewhere else. I turned. The elevator doors were closing. For a split second, I saw my reflection in the metal. Only, it wasn't me. The eyes were wrong. Too dark. Too empty. And just before the doors shut completely, the reflection smiled. I don't take elevators anymore. I don't trust them. Because I know now, that place is still there, waiting. And one day the doors will open again. And next time, I won't escape. I used to love working the night shift. The apartment complex I worked at in Los Angeles was quiet after midnight. Most tenants were asleep, and my job as the night security guard was simple. Monitor the cameras, patrol the hallways, and make sure no one was sneaking around where they shouldn't be. I liked the solitude, the silence, until the night I heard the voices in the elevator shaft, and realized something else was listening, too. It started 3 nights ago. I was doing my usual rounds, walking past the elevator bank when I heard it. A whisper, faint, distant, coming from inside the elevator shaft. At first, I thought it was just the sound of the cables shifting, or maybe the wind blowing through the vents. But then I heard words. 2 voices, a man and a woman, speaking in hushed, deliberate tones. I froze, pressing my ear against the metal doors. Their conversation was clear now. A man's voice. "He's going to call the elevator now." A woman's reply, "Yes, let's wait until he gets in." My blood ran cold. They were talking about me. I stepped back, scanning the hallway. There was no one around. The cameras showed empty hallways. The apartment doors were locked. I pressed the elevator call button, my heart pounding. The screen above the doors blinked to life. B1, B2, B3. I frowned. This building didn't have a B3. The elevator wasn't coming from the lobby. It was coming from somewhere deeper, somewhere that shouldn't exist. The whispers in the shaft continued, muffled but urgent. Then ding. The doors slid open, and there was no one inside. Just a single dirty child's shoe, lying in the center of the floor. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just stared at that little shoe, something in my gut screaming at me to run. But my body felt frozen. I stepped forward slowly, peering inside. The elevator was empty, but the air inside felt wrong. Too still, too cold. And then, over the elevator speakers, a voice whispered, "Going down." The doors slammed shut, and the elevator plummeted. I stood there, heart racing, watching the floor indicator drop. B3, B4, B5. The numbers kept going down, to floors that didn't exist. Then silence. The elevator had stopped, but the doors didn't open. I reached for my radio, my hands shaking. Dispatch. This is Joshua. I need assistance at the elevator bank. The cameras flickered. The screen showed the inside of the elevator. For a moment it was empty. Then, a dark figure flickered into view. Standing in the far corner, just beyond the reach of the light. Tall, motionless, facing the camera, watching me. The screen glitched, static distorting the image. Then the figure was closer. I stumbled back. My radio crackled. A voice came through. Not from dispatch. Not from security. From inside the elevator shaft. A whisper, right into my ear. It's your turn now. I dropped the radio. The whisper had come from inside the elevator shaft. Right next to me. I spun around, scanning the hallway. No one was there. The cameras flickered again. I turned back to the monitors, my pulse hammering. The elevator feed was still active, still showing the inside of the cab. And the figure was still there. Standing in the corner, unmoving. Its face obscured by static. Then, without warning, it took a step closer to the camera. The screen distorted, the feed warping, stretching unnaturally. Another step. The figure's head twitched violently, like it was glitching out of place. Another step. It was now just inches from the lens, but its face was still hidden. The screen flickered. For a single frame I saw its face clearly, and my blood ran cold. It was me, but not me. The skin was wrong, too smooth, too stretched. The eyes were hollow, dark pits of nothing. Then, the camera feed cut to black. And over the radio, the whisper came again. Going down. I backed away from the monitors, my breath shallow. Something was wrong with this building. With the elevator. I needed to get the hell out of here. I turned and bolted for the stairwell. I shoved the door open and took the steps 2 at a time, sprinting downward, my footsteps echoing in the empty shaft. I reached the lobby level and shoved the door open, only to find myself back on the 12th floor, exactly where I started. My stomach twisted. I turned back toward the stairwell, but the door was gone. A smooth wall stood in its place, as if the exit had never existed. The air was thick now, heavy with the smell of dust and mildew. Then, I heard the elevator ding. The doors slid open just a few feet down the hall. Inside was nothing but darkness. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The interior of the elevator was too dark. Like the space beyond the doors stretched into something much deeper than the small cab should allow. Then, a footstep. From inside the darkness. Something was in there, waiting, watching, and then it moved. The darkness shifted, and I saw a hand emerge from the shadows. Pale, too long, the fingers bent in the wrong directions. It reached out, toward me. I ran. I sprinted down the hallway, the walls closing in, the lights flickering wildly. The whispers followed me, overlapping voices, growing louder with every step. Then, up ahead I saw it. A door, slightly ajar, pale light spilling through the cracks. I lunged for it, shoving it open, and found myself back in the security room, exactly where I had been before. The monitors flickered. The elevator was back at the first floor. The doors were open, and the child's shoe was gone. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually, I forced myself to check the camera feed one more time. The inside of the elevator was empty now, or at least it looked that way. But the longer I stared, the more I had this feeling that something was still inside, watching, waiting, for the next person to step in. I grabbed my keys, and I left. I quit my job the next morning. I don't go near elevators anymore. I don't take the subway. I don't go into tight spaces where I might get trapped. Because I know that one day, that elevator will open for me again. And this time, I won't get out. I don't know if I'm losing my mind, or if something truly impossible happened to me. But I swear, last night, I stepped into an elevator and traveled 20 years into the past. And when I came back, I was erased from my own life. My name is Alex, and I live in a high-rise apartment in New York City. Nothing fancy, just a rundown old building with thin walls, an always broken intercom, and an ancient elevator that creaks with every ride. Yesterday started like any other day. I worked late, grabbed takeout, and finally got home around midnight. I stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for the 9th floor, and leaned against the back wall, exhausted. The doors slid shut. The elevator descended instead of going up. I frowned. I hadn't pressed the wrong button. I was sure of it. But instead of stopping at the lobby, the elevator kept going down. Past the ground floor, past the basement, deeper. The air inside the cab grew thick, the overhead light dimming slightly. Then, ding, the doors slid open, and I saw something that shouldn't exist. I was standing in the same apartment lobby, but it looked different, older, like it hadn't been renovated in decades. The floor was scuffed linoleum, the walls covered in peeling, faded wallpaper. The old cork bulletin board, the one that had been removed years ago, was back, covered in flyers from the 2000s. And then I noticed the biggest difference. The mailboxes. They weren't the sleek metal ones I was used to. They were old-fashioned wooden slots, each labeled with the tenants' names. I stepped closer, scanning the list. And my name wasn't there. My stomach twisted. This had to be a mistake. I turned back toward the elevator, but the doors had closed. The panel was dark, and when I pressed the button to call it back, nothing happened. I forced myself to breathe, think logically. I walked toward the lobby doors, peering outside. The street looked wrong. The neon signs that usually lit up the sidewalks were missing. The parked cars were older models. And then I saw a newspaper stand on the corner. I stepped outside, my heart pounding, and scanned the front page. The date read, April 18, 2004. My blood ran cold. I wasn't in my time anymore. I was in the past. I backed away from the newspaper stand, my pulse hammering in my ears. This wasn't possible. It had to be a dream, a stress-induced hallucination. I needed to talk to someone, find proof that this was real. Then I saw her, a woman walking out of the apartment building. My mom. But she wasn't the woman I knew now. She was younger, just like in the old photographs from my childhood. I felt my knees go weak. This couldn't be happening. I stepped forward, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom! She stopped, turning to face me, her brows furrowed in confusion. She didn't recognize me. She took a cautious step back. I'm sorry. Do I know you? My heart shattered. I tried again. It's me, Alex. Her face darkened. She took another step back. Then she whispered, as if afraid to say the words out loud. Alex died 10 years ago. Everything inside me froze. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. No, that wasn't right. I was here. I was alive. I looked down at my hands, my fingers trembling. I could feel myself. I was real. So why did my own mother think I was dead? I turned, looking around, desperate for something, anything that made sense. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw the elevator doors. They were open again, waiting. I ran for them. I slammed my hand against the button. The doors slid shut. The panel inside was different now. The floors were labeled with years, not numbers. The button for 2004 was still glowing. My hands were shaking as I scanned the panel. I found it. 2024. I pressed it over and over, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The elevator jerked, the lights flickering wildly. For a split second, the walls seemed to melt, warping into a distorted reflection of myself. Then, ding, the doors slid open. I was back, or at least I thought I was, until I saw the photographs. I rushed up to my apartment, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the lock. Everything looked normal. My furniture, my TV, my shoes by the door. For a moment I thought, maybe it really was a dream. Then my eyes landed on the photo frames on the bookshelf. The ones filled with pictures of me. I picked one up, my stomach churning. The photo was still there. A group shot of me and my family, taken last Christmas. But I was missing from it. I grabbed another frame. And another. And another. I wasn't in any of them. Like I had never existed. I don't know what happened to me in 2004. I don't know why my own mother thought I was dead. But I know one thing. That elevator wasn't normal. It didn't just take me to the past. It took something from me. And now, I'm afraid it's not done. 'Cause earlier tonight, I heard it again. The ding of the elevator in the hallway outside my door. Opening. Waiting. And this time, I don't think I'll come back at all.